Good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. Glad to see all of you on here today who are joining in and commenting already. We've got more people coming on, I see. We are studying our way through the Gospel of Luke. And this morning we are ready for Luke chapter 14. So we're going to start off, obviously, in verse 1. But I appreciate all of you who are on here today. I want to encourage you to, if you have a question or comment, as I put in here, throw it in the comment section, like and share our videos, and I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed this study of Luke, and there's so much in this account that is unique. As I've said before, each gospel account, that's true with each gospel account, but Luke has some things that are obviously unique to him that are very helpful to us. So, let's get going here. Luke chapter 14. The first 6 verses, we have another instance of Jesus healing on the Sabbath. We've covered this time and time again, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this, but he is a bit of a different setting here. He's in the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees. So naturally, this is going to come up. Hey, Mike, good afternoon. You're in, I think it's South Carolina. Maybe. I don't know. We talked a while back. Anyway, he's not in a synagogue here or anything like that. He is in the what we might call the lion's den, okay? Jesus is in the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat, and it's on the Sabbath day. All right, so as they're there, I find this interesting too. A certain man was before him who had, the New King James says dropsy. The Greek word here is hudropikos, hudro or hydro. This guy is swollen up from fluid collection in his body somewhere. So this is an observable ailment, an observable problem. Oh, Virginia. Okay, you're from Virginia. All right. Well, it seemed like we had talked about one of the Carolinas, but anyway, glad you're on here. A collection of fluid. And so Jesus spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So he just jumps right in because he's dealt with this so many times, as Luke's account has recorded, him performing some type of miracle on the Sabbath day. So, he just, he calls them on the spot, calls them out. I like what verse 4 says. They kept silent. Why would they do that? It seems like they've always got something to say to Jesus. They kept silent because if you read, all right. So I've got people keep commenting, that's great. I appreciate all of you coming on. Mansfield, Missouri. Glad to have you with us today, Charles. They kept silent. Well, if you look back in chapter 13, verses 10 through 7, he heals another individual on the Sabbath day. And he pointed out to them who rebuked him for doing such, listen, you hypocrites, you take care of an animal on the Sabbath day, but you're going to rebuke me for taking care of a human? And so again, back to chapter 13, verse 7, he put them to shame. So when he brings up the subject about is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day, they didn't say anything. He's put them to shame on multiple occasions. They have nothing to say. There is no logical, reasonable response that they can have based on all the confrontations that have already taken place. They kept silent. And he took him and healed him and let him go. Then he answered them, saying, the people who would always object, hey, good morning, Mark. Good to see you. What is his response to them? Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And so I've got this circled in my text here. And they could not answer. Why could they not answer him? Because he was right and they were wrong. There is no answer. There is no debate. There's no argument here. Their hypocrisy. So, and I pointed this out the last couple of studies together, all the way back to Luke chapter 12, where Jesus says in Luke chapter 12 and verse 2, there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nothing hidden that will not be made known. And in these chapters, 12, 13, and 14, and on into chapter 15 even, what he is doing is he is uncovering their hypocrisy with the truth. Truth, by its very nature, reveals stuff. It brings things to light. John chapter 3, verses 19 through 21. So it's not that they just wouldn't answer him. They could not answer him. Luke chapter 14, verse 6, because they were hypocritical, and he just lays it out on the table. And I think the physical setting is important here. He's in the house of one of these Pharisees when he does this. If you want to know what it means to be bold, if you want to know what it means to be strong, just look at Jesus. I mean, he sets out the model for what it means to be strong and bold, to stand up for what's right, to say what needs to be said. So, again, another healing on the Sabbath day, and he addresses their hypocrisy. Luke 14, verses 7 to 14, he talks to us about humility and kindness. So, obviously there have been people who are invited to this meal. All right, verse 7. He tells a parable, but he tells this parable based on his observation. He's just kind of paying attention. He notices what's going on. So look at verse 7 here. He told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places. And it's interesting, when they chose the best places, the Greek language there uses a tense that says they kept on choosing. People show up at this invitation and they are consciously seeking out the best seat in the house. And so Jesus rebukes them for that, for their arrogance, really. When you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him, and he who invited you and him come and say, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. This is a lesson on humility. But these Pharisees and the people, whoever it may have been that this Pharisee invited, they had kept on choosing they kept exalting themselves. Arrogance, pride. This is the pride of life. And the key to understanding this text here is in verse 11. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He makes that teaching, or he brings about that teaching based on his observation. He's watching how things happen in this party. Don't exalt yourself. You come to a place that you've been invited, just go sit down somewhere. Don't constantly be seeking out the best place. If somebody wants to exalt you, let them do that. Otherwise, you might get humiliated. Lesson on humility. And the Pharisees needed that. And the people that hung out with them needed that. People, and this is still a worldly thought today, greatness is in position. Greatness is in your willingness to exalt yourself. Greatness is in your willingness to step on other people to get another, as we say in our culture, to get another rung higher on the ladder. That is completely opposite of the teachings of Christ. Complete opposite. You might get humiliated if you try something like that. But, the world tells us something different. The world tells us that it's all about us and our advancement and our betterment and our empowerment. The gospel is completely opposite of that message. And so, you need to be humble. If you're going to be exalted, if you're going to be lifted up, let somebody else do that. Don't blow your own horn, as we say sometimes. He's talking to the crowd. But now, beginning in verse 12, he talks to the person who invited him to his house. When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor the rich neighbors. Why would he say that? Well, because they also invite you back, and you be repaid. This is a lesson for the owner of this house, for the host of this party. Don't do things out of an effort, out of the desire for people to do things back for you. Again, humility, hospitality and kindness, friendliness. These things aren't to be done out of the motive of, hey, maybe they'll have me over, or maybe they'll exalt me in some way. But again, that's the world's practice. We will flatter people who we feel can advance us. We'll flatter people who can give us something. That is completely opposite of the gospel. That's completely opposite of the life of Christ. But we want to fit in the world sometimes. We want to be accepted. We don't want to be looked at as different. We don't want to stick out. Let me tell you something. We're called to be different. And if we live and think like the world, we're no different than the world. And we're living in complete opposition to what Jesus would have us to do. So I wrote a verse in the margin of my Bible here. I'm going to flip over to it real quick. Very short verse, very easy to remember. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 2. I'll just start in verse 1. Let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so some have unwittingly entertained angels. All right, so my goal is not to talk about entertaining angels. All right, that's a historical comment based on something that had happened with Abraham. He's not telling us that when we have strangers in our house, it might be an angel. He's just saying, let brotherly love continue and be kind to people. But our kindness is not out of some ulterior motive to get something from somebody who can help me. That's not what the Christian is to do. When you give a feast, back to Luke 14 verse 13, when you give a feast, invite the poor, invite people who can't do anything for you. Isn't that what God has done for us? He didn't do good for us. He didn't send his son here for us because we might give him something back or because he owed us something. When you do that, when you invite the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind, the outcasts of society, the people who a Pharisee would generally look at and say, oh, that guy must be a sinner. I don't want anything to do with him. You will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Here you go. Here's what we're looking for. We're not looking for world renown. We're not looking to start some movement. We're not looking for some political recognition. You shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. You see, that's what the Christian is looking for. That's our goal in life. We're living in view of eternity. We're not living in view of some in-the-moment political immediate return. We're living in view of eternity. And so we'll treat everybody right. We'll treat our friends right, yes, of course. But we'll treat even the outcasts of society right. We'll treat them correctly because we're looking to eternity. We're looking to the resurrection. So Jesus takes an opportunity to address both the crowd that he's been observing, again, verse 7, but he also talks to the guy who's throwing the party. Then he talks about another invitation, and the reason he does this is because of something that somebody in the crowd says. So when one of those who sat at the table with him, we don't know who this guy is. Obviously, he had been invited to the party at the ruler of the Pharisees' house. But when he hears what Jesus says, he says, "Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God." So Jesus, based on that response, gives us one of the parables. And this parable is called the parable of the Great Supper. And it's in this context of being in a Pharisee's house. It's in the context of watching people trying to find the best seat in the house, the most honorable position that could be found. So he tells us a parable about a certain man. That certain man would represent God, who throws a great supper and invites many. The first invitation would represent, since this is a parable, this first invitation represents God's offering of salvation through Jesus Christ to the Jews. All right, so keep that in mind. Great supper. He invited many. He sent servants. The servants would be the prophets. He sent his servants at supper time to say to those who were invited, "Come, for all things are now ready." These are God's messengers saying, all right, the Messiah is here. It's time. But they all began with one accord to make excuses. An excuse is a lie in a fancy suit. I forget who told me that, but I liked it. An excuse is a lie in a fancy suit. So look at these excuses. Well, I bought a piece of ground and I need to go look at it. I've owned property in the past. I guess it would be a luxury to have enough money to buy a piece of land sight unseen, as we say. So here's a comment. Let me look at this real quick. Since we live in a time when we don't give dinners and invite people, we don't know how we could fulfill this. Giving to food bank. Well, I think there are a variety of ways. I think you're right in the observation that hospitality has diminished greatly, even within the church, and I think that's sad. Our doors need to be open at all times. We have fellowship meals. I think it's interesting to even, and these are just thoughts bouncing around in my head. I think it's even interesting to notice what we call our assigned seating in church buildings. I'll tell you what, I've seen this happen. A visitor will come into a church building and they'll sit down somewhere, and a member who sits in that place normally will come to that visitor and say, "Hey, this is my seat." I've seen it happen. Okay, I'm not just telling a story. I've seen it happen. And that visitor never came back. Hospitality is more than just inviting someone into your house. The Greek word, in fact, for hospitable, okay, just for instance, the elders, one qualification of an elder is that they need to be given to hospitality. That doesn't mean you're always inviting people into your home. That Greek word means kindness to strangers. Now, having people in your home is a way to show hospitality, absolutely. There are a lot of ways that we can be hospitable in the sense of kindness. Absolutely. We got comment after comment coming up here. Those who do something for immediate gain, Jesus said, I tell you, they have their reward. Yeah, absolutely they do. No excuses can be given on that glorious day. Absolutely true. I remember when I was very young, my grandparents would feed migrant farm workers that were passing through. Yeah, that's hospitality. There are a lot of ways to be kind to people, and that's the concept of the biblical term hospitality, kindness to strangers. A lot of different ways we can do that. Will we have assigned seats in heaven? I don't think so, Wayne. Not that I know of. You know, the best seat in the church building is the back pew, apparently, because that's the first one that fills up. COVID-19 here at Mammoth has kind of thrown everything off because we've got every other pew taped off. Let me tell you something. It makes the singing sound a lot better because we're all spread out. We're not sitting in our assigned seats. Anyway, that's kind of off the topic here, but be a good person. Be kind, even to strangers. So these people are making excuses. I've bought land, I need to go see it. I bought 5 yoke of oxen, I need to go test them, okay? Have any of you ever bought a vehicle without a test drive or without researching the vehicle? Well, that's what this guy says. I've got some oxen, I need to go test them. Now listen to this guy. I have married a wife, therefore I cannot come. That one always makes me laugh. It makes me laugh one reason. One of my instructors at Memphis School of Preaching would talk to single students. He'd say, don't be looking for a wife. They're already married. Well, you understand what's being said there, but I've married a wife and I cannot come. Isn't it interesting the excuses that people will throw out to not obey the gospel? Think about these 3 excuses. I'm too young people. I'm too busy. That would be people with kids and, young people, young adults. I'm too old. We can find an excuse for anything. An excuse is a lie dressed up in a fancy suit. Period. What is the response of the person, God, this certain man who is inviting people to a great supper, salvation through Christ? He became angry. Verse 21. So I have this quote written in the margin of my Bible about these excuses. They all pled something that pertained to self, and all placed the gratification of selfish desires above duty and obligation. It was all about themselves. And you know what? That was 2,000 years ago, and the world hasn't changed one bit. People will find any type of excuse to not become a Christian. Christians will find and I'm using that term Christian loosely. Christians will find any type of excuse to not be at services on Sunday night or Wednesday night or for Sunday morning Bible class. I don't have to use Hebrews 10:25 to talk about attendance. I can use Luke chapter 14, verses 15 to 24. We're given an opportunity. We are invited by God Himself to be a member of the church, the Great Supper. And think of the excuses that people will use. Well, you know God's response? He gets angry, verse 21. All right, go out quickly, invite everybody. So this parable, again, in context, the first invited would represent the Jews, would represent these Pharisees. They reject it because they've got a lot of other stuff going that all pertain to self. Go out into the streets and lanes of the city. Bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind. In my opinion, that'd be talking about any non-Jew. Because, Jewish people, they elevated themselves above others. Samaritans now, Gentiles. Master, it's done, and there is still room. Verse 22. There's no limited occupancy within the church. You'll go into a building sometimes, and maybe you'll have a sign that says maximum occupancy of whatever. That sign does not exist in the church. And occupancy, membership in the Lord's church is not limited to a certain class or to a certain socioeconomic group or to a certain race. It's open for everybody, but think of all the excuses that are offered. Go out to the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. I think that end of verse 23 there is important because that's God's mindset. I want my house full of people. But some of the most privileged people, again, contextually, the Jews, make excuses as to why they can't come. For I say to you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper. The Jews that rejected God, read Acts 13. About verses 44 to 52 or so. They didn't have time for it. And so, we're going to turn to the Gentiles. There's a great supper available, and there's more than enough room. Let's not make any excuses as to why we can't be there. Count the cost. All right, let's move on here. Counting the cost of discipleship, verses 25 to 33. Now great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone, and Luke records this a little differently. It's what Jesus said. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Hate. That's a strong word. And we know, in the English language, we typically think of despise, abhor. This is something that is disgusting to us. Is Jesus telling us to despise our parents and despise our spouse and kids and our siblings? No, that's not what he's saying. You might write in the margin of your Bible there, Matthew chapter 10 and verse 37. He who loves father or mother more than me. So put that contrast in your mind. This is how Jesus thinks. If we are more dedicated, if we love more our physical family than him, what we are saying is we hate him. That's what he's saying. And that's a pretty strong contrast, isn't it? But I want you to notice then what he says. If you don't hate all these things, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Verse 26. Verse 27, you cannot be my disciple. And then you go down to verse 33, cannot be my disciple. In the Greek language there, those three times, he uses a term, it's an absolute negative. It's an adverb. It's an absolute negative. If you have more dedication to your physical family, there is no possible way that you can be my disciple. It is absolutely an impossibility. One issue that comes to my mind within the churches of Christ is this issue of marriage, divorce, and remarriage, and family. We will make exceptions for family. We will make excuses for family. We will find, we use the phrase loopholes, workarounds. We will find every way possible to make excuses for flesh and blood, even if they may be in sin, to work around what the Bible says about that particular subject. And the reason I'm using that subject is because I've seen it so many times in over 20 years of preaching. Yeah, but it's my brother. Yeah, but it's my parents or my kids. If you are more dedicated, if I shouldn't say you, I should say I, if we are more dedicated in finding workarounds to the Word of God than we are to sticking with the Word of God, we hate Jesus, period. We love Him less than the connections that we have in this world. So he illustrates it. If you're going to come after me, let me illustrate it for you, he says. Which of you, intending to have in mind to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost? Or a king thinking about going to war does not sit down first. Pay attention to words. Hate, cannot, first. There are words that reappear in this text that are emphasizing something. So likewise, here's the lesson, verse 33. Whoever, this is, in other words, this applies across the board. Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has, here's that absolute negative, cannot be my disciple. I've been married for, this November will be 19 years. I've got 2 kids. I love my wife and kids. But if I'm more dedicated to them than I am to the Lord, I cannot serve Him. I cannot be His disciple. That word disciple means pupil or student. It is an impossibility. If I am more dedicated to my family physically than God, it is an impossibility that I can be His disciple. That is very strong language. The interesting thing here is this word forsake that's used in the text. Verse 33. Apatasso is the Greek word, and it means to place in order. If you do not place in order all that he has, he cannot be my disciple. Living the Christian life is about priorities. And if our priorities are not right, we cannot be his disciple. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. If our priorities are out of line, we cannot be his disciples. And that leads into be salt. This is within that same context. So he's made this teaching. You've got to count the cost. You've got to consider your family, the comforts of life, your even your own self-interests. If you're going to follow me, you've got to be salt. You've got to be, well, let's just look at it. Salt is good. Following him is good. But if that salt has lost its flavor, if you lose your purpose, how shall it be seasoned? What good is it going to do? It is good for nothing. It's not fit for land. It's not fit for the dunghill. Men will throw it out. If you're not fulfilling your purpose as a disciple, you are useless. If you have things that you are more dedicated to than being a student of God, a disciple, you're useless to him. You cannot be his disciples. Okay, so Mike says if we love Jesus first and foremost, we will love all others more and more as well. And that's a great point, Mike. Thank you for saying that, because, you know, the Bible does tell us, and I can't think of the context, I can't think of the verse, but the first commandment is love God, and the second is like unto it, love your neighbor. Every other commandment falls under the umbrella of those two. of those two commandments. But the first, the primary, is love God. If I know how to do that, everything else is going to fall in line. So you absolutely, if anybody can think of that, where that passage is, you can throw it here in the comment section because I can't. Seems like it's in Matthew 22. I don't know. But anyway, good thought there. So the Christian, you've got to fulfill your mission. Just like salt has a purpose in both preservation and flavor, the Christian has a purpose. And if you lose sight of that purpose, you have no purpose. You become useless. A lot to learn in that chapter. Be humble, be kind, don't make excuses. You've got to count the cost, and you've got to fulfill your purpose. I appreciate all of you who were on here today. I'm going to wrap it up. That is Luke chapter 14. A lot of comments today, and I always appreciate that and enjoy that. If you have anything else to add, even after the live stream is over, you feel free to add it in there. Like I said, if somebody can find that verse. Let me look over here real quick. Matthew 22. For some reason... I was right. Hey guys, check that out. I was right. Matthew 22, beginning in verse 34, down through verse 40. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. That is the first, or this is the first, the primary, and great commandment. And the second is like to it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and prophets. In other words, everything that follows, every other commandment, every other concept of being a person of God falls under one of these two. And that's, in fact, read the Ten Commandments. All of the Ten Commandments fall under either love your God or love your neighbor. Something to think about for the Christian. Every commandment that we obey falls under one of those two. Love God, love your neighbor. All right, let's wrap it up. Appreciate you all being here today. Again, Charles, you're welcome. And thank you for being on here today. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Like and share the videos. If you have somebody that would like to do these studies, they don't do Facebook, send them over to our YouTube channel, Mammoth Spring Church of Christ. I throw all of our content on there. It's not live, but it's all there anyway. So thank you for being on our live stream today. The plan is to come back tomorrow, Lord willing, and we will do Luke chapter 15 about things that are lost. So thanks for being on here today. Have a good day, and we will see you on the next video.